Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. We promote positive method of training and behavior modification through stress-free methods. As part of that mission, we offer free webinars like the one you're about to watch. Subjects range from dog behavior, stress-free training, and other tools to help you understand your relationship with your dog. If you liked the webinar, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Click the notification bell and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when future videos are posted. Now enjoy the webinar.
All right, let's get started. So, hey everybody, welcome to today's webinar, Helping the Under-Socialized Dog, sponsored by Your Dog's Friend, a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. Since 2006, we've been promoting the use of positive reinforcement training methods by hosting free webinars in this, just like this one, and posting valuable resources on our website, offering affordable training classes both in person and online, and providing free advice and referrals. So we hope you will enjoy this webinar and help spread the word about Your Dog's Friend. My name is Carrie Hoare, and I'm a volunteer with Your Dog's Friend and will be your host for today's webinar. Our speaker today is Jessey Scheip. Jessey is a licensed veterinary technician specialist, and certified trainer. With her company, Mindful Mentor Behavior Counseling, she brings a unique perspective and combination of behavior, medicine, and passion for education to help companion animals in the Washington, D.C. area. She works directly with both the family and their doctors to develop a 360-degree comprehensive practical approach to helping dogs and cats with behavioral challenges. So just before we begin, I'd like to remind you that Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit. So if you find this webinar helpful, please consider making a donation to help support these free webinars and the other free resources that we offer. So let's get started with today's webinar. I'm sure everyone is really interested to hear about the topic of how to help our under-socialized dogs. So Jessey, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jessey, and so today we're going to be talking about how we can help some of these under-socialized dogs that end up coming into our world. So in general, socialization tends to be a pretty hot topic. So even before the days of COVID and, quarantining and pandemic puppies, we always wanted to talk a lot about socialization with our young animals. In this webinar, we're going to go over a lot of different aspects that both influence how under-socialized animals come into being, but also why socialization is so important in the first place. So here's kind of our list of objectives. We're going to go over some behavioral development, the role of socialization in adult behavior. We're going to learn how to recognize under-socialized animals and their unique communication styles. And then we'll start diving into what can we do to help our under-socialized dogs specifically by setting up the home, how we can help these guys learn, and then if needed, when is medical intervention warranted, and what are some of your options for that? So to start us off with behavioral development, there's a lot of different specific growth periods for dogs and cats for that matter. And so when they're first starting out, we're born, they're like, I like to call them little jelly beans. They're these little jelly beans, their eyes and ears are closed. They're really reliant on their mother for any sort of help in living, eating, staying warm, that kind of stuff. So there's not a whole lot of learning that's happening there. But as we start moving into our transitional period where the nervous system is really getting kicked into gear, that's when their eyes and ears open and they're finally able to take in the environment and learn more about it. So then we hit our socialization period, which in dogs is between about age 3 weeks to about 16 weeks. And that closing period, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's more of a gradual change. But it's during this time that animals are learning what's normal in their world and what's not. And so while the socialization period is certainly important for behavioral development, there are a lot of other factors that can influence it, which you can see over here on the right side. So things like genetics, depending on what study you look at, anywhere between 30 and 60% of adult behavior is based off of genetics alone. But there's also things like the mothering process and, how stressed or how well fed the mother was when she was pregnant with them. What does their learning history look like? Did they have any traumatic events? And then, of course, their physical health is going to influence how their outward behavior is expressed as well. So there's a lot of different definitions for socialization, but really what it is, it's a period of development that's required for social animals to learn how to navigate their big kid world. So like I said, it's learning what's normal and what's not. And ultimately what we're trying to do is expose our puppies to sort of novel, neutral things in a positive way. One of the important factors that I like to harp on for socialization, especially when we're dealing with very fearful puppies, is if this thing that we're exposing them to is already causing a fear response, it's no longer technically socialization because it's not a neutral stimulus. We're already kind of scared of it. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But the other interesting thing about dogs compared to other species is that the process of becoming domesticated, they developed what we call neotenized characteristics, where they basically remain puppies into adulthood. So that neotenization actually has allowed their socialization period to get a lot bigger. So wolves, for example, their genetic ancestor, their socialization period is 7 days, and that's it, because they don't have a whole lot of novel things that they need to learn about. Whereas with domesticated dogs, they have to learn how to navigate our very human world successfully, because a lot of the things that we put on them or we put them into aren't very natural for dogs. And so we have a much larger window of opportunity to help them learn how to be dogs in our world. So then within the socialization period itself, you have a few subcategories. So the first one is what we call the primary socialization period, which is between about 3 to 6 or 3 to 8 weeks, depending on your source. And so it's during that time that dogs are primed to learn about their own species. So they're interacting with their litter mates, their mother is there, ideally we've got a couple aunties and uncles that are around, and we're just basically learning how to dog. And then you have your secondary socialization period, which is from about 8 weeks to the end of that socialization period at 16 weeks of age. And it's at that point that they're better primed to learn about other species and locations and environments and things like that. And then sort of smack dab in the middle of these two periods, you have what we call fear periods. And so fear periods are very normal. It's sort of like our children. Anybody here that has kids, they go through their stranger danger phase at about 6 months of age. It's the same thing with puppies. So even as they're learning about their normal world, occasionally they'll have these little episodes of, oh boy, suddenly getting in the car is really scary for some reason. Those are very normal. Our job is just to help kind of get them through that little fear period successfully. And so the first one is at about 8 weeks old, and then we anecdotally have a few others, sometimes around 6, 12, 18 months of age, that sort of thing. So even though a lot of what they're doing is priming them to learn about normalcy in their world, there are occasionally going to be these little moments of, oh boy, that was way overwhelming. But kind of looking at the big picture with these guys, this is why we talk about bringing new puppies home at about 8 weeks of age. So at this point, they've had the first 2 months of life to learn about being a dog with their litter mates. And now at 8 weeks old, they're in a perfect place, moving into their secondary socialization period, and they're going to start learning how to live in ideally their forever home. So if we grew up in the country with our breeder or our foster or whoever that first caretaker may be, now we're going to move into suburbia or city life, where we're going to have to learn how to deal with those types of environments. Now, even after the socialization window has closed, that doesn't necessarily mean learning and development is over. While we might be little sponges and we're learning a lot about our environment during the socialization period, there's still things that we need to learn about as we get older. So it's kind of like, yes, I need to expose my human children to lots of things by the time they're 10, but we haven't even hit puberty yet. So there's still a lot that we need to learn about. So as we're going through the learning process with these guys, I like to help people focus on, assessing a situation their puppy's in. Is this a good experience or a bad experience? It's not really neutral or quote unquote fine. So I get this a lot with my own assessments and consultations where I'd ask a person, how do you feel your puppy did in that situation? I'm like, oh, well, it was fine. I'm like, okay, well, if you have to use the word fine, it's probably not fine. It was probably not that great. And so over here, we have our little bank account analogy that I like to use. So any positive experience or fun thing that we go through is going to put money into our bank account. So it's going to put good experiences in that memory bank. And anytime we have something bad or scary happen, we're taking money out of that bank. And so in life, it's never possible to 100% avoid all scary things. But ideally, we have enough of a savings in that good experience bank that when something scary does happen, it's not detrimental. I'm still very much in the black. I can bounce back from this scary thing, no big deal. And earlier we talked about how we're trying to teach our animals to live in our very human world. And I say that because situations that might be fun or exciting for us can be very overwhelming for our dogs, even when they are very well socialized. If you have any experience with service dog breeding and development programs, a lot of them wash out because they just can't cope with a lot of the public, very social type situations, and dogs that are going to be helping humans cope with that on their own, they have to be able to deal with it by themselves. And so now we're dealing with your typical family pet or an under-socialized animal, and they absolutely cannot cope with these very normal circumstances to us because it's just so overwhelming. All right, so we talked about what is socialization, why is it important, and what are we trying to achieve. So now let's say we do have an animal that we think might be under-socialized. There will be certain characteristics that are classic to that type of animal. And so the first one we start with is their background. So a lot of these dogs are going to come from kind of rough starts in life, so maybe they were born in the shelter or rescue, they were born overseas, they were village or street dogs. And so those types of environments are just very different to when they're raised in a very human-centric, busy type environment. We might also have some low quality breeding kennels. So puppy mills, for example, there's not a whole lot of commitment to socialization or proper exposure. And then the last one is if maybe that puppy needed to have strict confinement during their socialization period. So even in the best of scenarios, if I have a puppy who maybe had a really, really severe injury or illness, that puppy just isn't going to have the same opportunities as another one because they have to be kept confined and they have to be kept away from other individuals. So even, again, best case scenario, sometimes these things happen. And in the world of COVID-19, a lot of us were stuck at home. We were working from home. We weren't really going anywhere. It seemed like the perfect time to bring in a new puppy. But we're seeing that because we weren't able to take our puppies to a lot of places and meet new people and other dogs, unfortunately, they grew up to be fairly under-socialized. And so they struggle a lot as adults now. It will also have specific body language themes, I suppose you could say. So under-socialized dogs, they tend to be highly emotional and reactive to the environment. So they startle really easily. Again, even benign sounds like dropping something on the floor. Sure, I might jump a little bit, but I move on. These guys have a total panic and they scramble away and they go and try and find somewhere that they can hide. They'll also often have a lot of fear-based body language. So their tail is going to be tucked a lot. Their body is going to be kind of slunk to the floor. They also won't show a whole lot of social seeking behaviors. And I've got a video or two of that in a little bit. But basically, they're not coming up to people very often and saying, hey, can you interact with me? Or, hey, look, here's my toy. You want to play with me? They kind of keep to themselves. And then you might also have dogs that are very inhibited, meaning rather than doing anything, they just kind of crawl inside themselves and don't move. So we call that freezing or learned helplessness, where they feel that nothing that they do in their environment is really going to help save them from this scary situation. So we see a lot of freezing in these guys. But then finally, you might also have maybe early onset of aggression. So aggression are simply behavioral strategies that are used to help control a situation. So if I'm very overwhelmed by my environment, I might use aggression to say, get away, get away, get away. I can't deal with this. Please leave me alone. And then the final thought here is, a lot of people assume that under-socialized dogs, well, maybe they were abused when they were puppies. And while that can certainly be the case, the majority of the time, even dogs that do have an abuse history, they do still tend to be very pro-social because they want acceptance and they want you to be happy with them and don't want you to be mad and constantly getting onto them. So there'll still be a lot of social facilitation there. Whereas with under-socialized dogs, we're not seeing a whole lot of that. So here's our segue into some of the body language that we might see with these animals. I've got a couple videos on the next few slides, but these are some resources that you can use to kind of get the ball rolling on your end too. So there's two books over here. Doggy Language by Lily Chin is a really, really cute little book that has a lot of illustrations on the different types of body language that dogs will show, what they mean in what context, that sort of thing. But if you want something that's a bit more heavy duty, the Canine Body Language by Brenda Aloff is fantastic. When I was in my early days of developing my own behavior related skills, this book was a game changer for me. So I absolutely love it. And then finally, on the right-hand side, Fear Free and Fear Free Happy Homes have a lot of free videos and resources that you can use to learn more about body language and fear, anxiety, that sort of thing. So in the fear-free paradigm, they have this concept called FAS, which stands for fear, anxiety, and stress. And they say that there are 4 manifestations of FAS. So we've got your fight versus flight, which most of us are familiar with. And then you also have your fidget and your freeze. So in a more practical way, I kind of divide up body language into 5 different categories. And we're going to go through each of them here really quick. So the first one is when we've got positive pro-social body language. So if a dog is actually interested in interacting socially, they're going to approach you. They're going to have very soft eyes. They might do like soft, slow blinking. Those are what we consider appeasement gestures, just to say like, hey, don't mind me. I'm very sweet and friendly and I don't mean any harm. They might have their ears slightly back. They'll have a little bit of a mid-level medium tail wag, but then they're also going to initiate physical contact with you. So they'll nudge your hand with their nose, or maybe they'll lean their shoulder against you. My favorite is always when they shove their bottom in your face and they say, okay, you can scratch my rump. Those are always fun. So in this top right video, we're going to see a dog who there's a little bit of concern in the very beginning, but then he says, yeah, all right, I'll come over. And he asks for cuddles. And as you can see, as time goes on, he'll turn his little bottom around and say, look, here, you can scratch my booty. That's nice. Yeah, thanks. So this is a dog who chose to approach someone seeking interaction. So that's positive social body language. In this next video, though, we're going to see a little bit more conflict. So just like people, you can have an animal who's, I kind of want to approach, but maybe I'm a little overwhelmed by this situation. So some of the things that you'll see in this conflicted body language is a bit of an approach and retreat at the same time. There might be some excessive sniffing or increased exploration, we might call it. They'll also have kind of wide or hard eyes where, in the positive social body language, we talked about the soft, squinty, and eye contact. But these guys, they're a little bit more intense. As far as body carriage goes, it can be either up, very upright, or sort of slinky down to the ground. So it kind of depends on the dog. But really, the big thing here is that there's that slow approach, quick to retreat, seems interested but unsure. So if we watch this big girl, she's like, yeah, I'm gonna come over. Wait, never mind. So I kind of want to, but I'm really unsure in this situation. All right, next, we've got neutral avoidant. So this is where we start getting into body language where people will often use the term fine because the dog didn't overtly remove themselves or tell the other person to go away. So if I'm using neutral avoidant body language, I'm going to kind of look away from the thing that I'm trying to avoid. So I'm going to avoid eye contact. I'm not going to move a whole lot. Some of these dogs might do some lip licking or even just like licking of themselves. Sometimes they do that as a bit of a self-soothing behavior. There might also be some yawning. And then the last one is as the person leaves, sometimes they'll do this whole body wet dog shake off type thing. All right, so then this next one, we're getting a bit more into your fearful body language. So this dog is one that I was working with on some cooperative handling. He's terrified at the vet. And so his owner is right there with the long jeans. And then I think his 5-year-old sister is on the left there. And then I'm kind of off to the right. So in this video, you'll see that he's very watchful. It's like, okay, I don't know how I feel about this. So you have treats. All right, that's cool. But I'm going to stay over here near mom and I'm going to check in with mom, make sure we're okay. So he's not coming over. He's not interested in really interacting with me. I mean, the treats are great and all, but he's not very happy with this interaction. Lots of check-ins with the owners. Are we okay? Oh, he's such a sad panda. All right, so ears back, lowered tail, really not interested in approaching me. So this is kind of that fearful avoidant. So our last one is frenetic avoidant. Now this is another easily missed or misinterpreted type of body language. So there's a lot of tail wagging and the dog is in close proximity to the person, but there's no direct interest, there's no approach or nudging or asking for interactions. So this guy, you're going to see that there's a lot of excessive sniffing. We might lick the hands or the face of the person. Those are called a lick to dismiss. Basically, it's a very polite one little lick, and then I walk away saying like, okay, we're done, leave me alone. So this guy, I mean, even looking at the dog, you're like, it's a yellow lab. How can he not love people? But no, the person is like, hey, come say hi. No, thanks. Lip lick, dismiss, bye-bye, moving on, get away from me. So this is another interaction where, he's putting up with it. And granted, he's tethered to the wall, so he doesn't have a whole lot of options. But we see this a lot with pitties and Labradors and some golden retrievers for that matter, where they're busy, 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 but they're not actually seeking attention. So when it comes to communication, it's a two-way street. So the dog is going to be using all this body language to indicate whether they're interested in social interaction or if they want some space. And then we, as their partner in communication, can use certain body language to help them know that I'm not trying to invade your personal space. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable with me. So we use what we call calming signals or disengagement, where I'm going to keep my hands very still and kind of quiet. Might be folded in my lap. A lot of people talk with their hands. You can't see me, but even as I'm sitting over here just talking to my screen, I'm using my hands a lot. But if I have an animal that's very fearful, I'm going to make sure I'm conscious of what my hands are doing. They're folded in my lap. They're not doing anything. I'm going to turn my body away slightly. I'm not going to orient directly towards the animal, and I'm not going to make eye contact. I'm barely going to look at them at all, because direct eye contact is a very intimate body language signal. And if I have an animal that's very insecure and unsure about interacting with me, that's the worst possible thing that I can do. So I'm going to try not to look at them, and I'll use my peripheral vision to figure out where are they in my vicinity. Okay, so now we're getting into classifications of under-socialized animals. Now, this is not a generalized approach. This is kind of the way I look at under-socialized animals. So again, I have a 5-tier system. So for tier 1, I might have a dog who's just a little timid or shy, but they can recover, they can warm up pretty easily, they make friends. They're a little slow to warm up to things. In tier 2, then we're going to have similar, but it takes a bit longer to warm up, and maybe they'll only have selective friends. They're not going to be BFFs with everybody. At this point, we're starting to get a bit more into the moderate severity. So for these dogs, they're comfortable inside, but when they go outside, they're very on edge. They're constantly looking around. Maybe they're at the end of the leash, walking really fast when they're going on walks. They want to stop and smell things a lot, but then they quickly get distracted and move on to something else. So for these dogs, they will often do better outside of very heavy city life. They might do better when they go visit the family out in the country, because again, they just get really overwhelmed by a lot of the noises and people and cars and that sort of thing. So in tier 4, these guys are very, very scared when they're outside. Maybe they drag their person out to the grassy area, go to the bathroom really quick, and they drag their person right back inside. These dogs can be normal indoors, and they're, very friendly and pro-social and playful in their safe zone and with familiar people, but anything outside of that is really, really hard for them. And then finally, you have your tier 5s where they had zero socialization. They have no idea how to live in our world, and they're just constantly terrified all the time. So these are dogs that are hiding in the closet. They don't want to come out. They can't eat when people are near, that sort of thing. These dogs are always, always scared. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that any of these different tiers of severity can also be accompanied by reactivity or aggression. Now, traditionally speaking, under-socialized dogs don't use a lot of aggression because you have to have a measure of confidence to use aggression, and these guys have zero. But just so you know, occasionally you will have a very fearful, inhibited, under-socialized dog that, put in the right circumstances, will display aggression as a way to protect their personal space. All right, so in our discussion of how to help these animals, we're just going to assume that we're working with a tier 5, because anything that you're doing with a tier 5 under-socialized dog is going to work just as well with a 1 through 4. So again, with these guys, they're terrified and antisocial all the time. If you're lucky, you might have a tier 5 that has at least bonded with another dog, and sometimes you can use that dog as kind of a segue to like get in their inner circle just a little bit. If you're unlucky, they're the only dog in the household and you work with what you got. But anyway, so with these guys, what we're trying to do is minimize stress as much as possible, which is really hard because living in your house is stressful. So sometimes it helps to kind of peel apart the different aspects of what do animals or dogs need to be successful and live okay lives in the first place. And so over here on the right hand side, we have this hierarchy of needs, and at the very bottom we've got those biological needs. So all animals need nutrition, water, air, sleep, shelter, medicine, but most of all, safety. So if my animal doesn't feel safe in my household, none of these other aspects in the hierarchy of dogs matter. No amount of love or trust and training or anything is going to help these animals, because already in that biological needs section, we have a huge missing piece, and that's the safety. So step 1 is we have to figure out ways to make our animal feel as safe as possible living in our house. So in order to develop that safe space, first thing you want to do is kind of take a look at where your dog tends to gravitate to in the first place. So a lot of dogs that are fearful in a house are going to find sort of dark, cramped, cozy little spots. So I've had some dogs that like to hide behind the couch. Some prefer to go hide in the closet. Maybe they really like their crate. Especially if they grew up, sort of in the puppy mill type situation, being in their crate might be their only comfort zone. And so I've had a couple dogs who will, they'll go outside to go to the bathroom, but as soon as they come back in, they make a beeline for their crate and they go in there and they hide in there the whole time. But as a general rule, they're going to be looking for places that are that might be kind of dark, maybe covered. But every dog is different. So being observant and seeing what your personal dog is gravitating to is going to be really important. Even things like surfaces, maybe they prefer hardwood over carpet or vice versa. A lot of under-socialized dogs really hate slippery surfaces. So hardwood, linoleum, that sort of thing are really tough for them. So if you find that to be the case and you have a lot of hardwood in your house, maybe you can invest in a bunch of area rugs or those cheapo yoga mats that you can get at the dollar store, and just have like a little non-slip pathway from their safe space to areas of importance, like the back door, for example. So once we've kind of figured out where does my dog want to go in the first place, we need to figure out ways to make it even more comfortable and even more safe. So having a white noise machine in that area can be really helpful, because it'll help block out environmental noises like traffic or people talking in the house, that sort of thing. Playing soft music in conjunction with white noise is a really great option. Classical music has been shown to help reduce stress in dogs, so you can play some classical music for them. There's even a whole series of dog-specific relaxation music. You can can get an eye calm through a dog's ear, that type of thing. But then I also really love pheromone products for these types of areas. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Adaptol, Adaptol is a pheromone product that has taken the maternal appeasing pheromone and synthesized it. And so when mother dogs produce that pheromone when they're nursing and cuddling with their puppies, and it's designed to help promote social bonding and learning, relaxation, that sort of thing. So pheromones are a great over-the-counter, non-prescription product that's both natural and effective. Want to make sure that they have some comfortable bedding in there. And again, this is where dog preference is going to come into play, because I've had some dogs who absolutely hate beds. Why? Because they were never socialized to them. And so if you try and put a nice big cushy memory foam bed in their safe place, now it's not safe anymore. So ideally, any of these little changes that we make to their hidey hole, you should see them being more relaxed there, gravitating more to it, sleeping more heavily, that sort of thing. And that's where being able to read your dog's body language is really, really important, because it's not like they're going to come out and say, "Thank you for the bed, I love it." No, we have to be able to interpret their body postures and body language to help us understand, yes, that was a good change, versus no, that was a bad one. But whatever you end up doing to help improve their little safe space, the big thing here is try not to avoid them try not to approach them while they're there. If they're afraid of us, the worst possible thing that we can do is go over there and try and touch them while they're in their safe place, because we are essentially the boogeyman right now. No amount of well-meaning intention is going to help my dog understand that me approaching and touching them is supposed to be a good thing. As far as they're concerned, you're a giant 10-foot tarantula who's coming into their little hidey hole and they have nowhere else to go. So we want to avoid interacting with them when they're in their hidey hole. That is their safe place. That is where they can go when they're feeling super overwhelmed. So some other things that we can do to help them be as healthy and emotionally stable as possible is ensuring they have proper nutrition. So we always want to make sure we're reaching for well-developed brands that have gone through a lot of research, have veterinary nutritionists on their council, that sort of thing, because the idea here is you are what you eat, right? So if my dog is only eating chicken and rice, then you're not getting a whole lot of great nutrition. So I want to make sure we're using a good balanced diet. 75% of their daily nutrition should come from one of these commercial foods. And we want to make sure that we're avoiding things like raw, gluten-free homemade diets. Those are okay if you've worked with a veterinary nutritionist, but you don't want to be trying to do those things on your own, because nutrition is really, really complicated. The final thing here is make sure that your protein contents are less than 27%. A lot of well-meaning people will reach for high protein diets, but those have actually been correlated with increased stress and anxiety, because theoretically, if you're feeding too much protein, your body might not be getting enough tryptophan to create serotonin, which is your brain's happy coping neurotransmitter. So proteins 27% or less. Make sure you're using age-appropriate diets from a lot of the well-known brands. So then we use our food as part of our enrichment program and hopefully encouraging them to build confidence inside my house. So at the end of the day, if an animal is alive, they have to be food motivated. Really the big thing is you have to find ways that you can use the food in practical ways to get a good response out of it. So in the very early days, it might be, I'm not going to be around when you eat. I'll just put your food at the very edge of your safe spot, and then I'm going to walk away and you can eat it whenever you want to. And so, here we are, we're trying to make feeding as easy as possible. Some dogs do better if you're like in the room, but on the opposite side. Or, we talked a little bit earlier about having their doggy buddy that they get confidence from. Well, does it help to have the two of them eating at the same time in the same space? Maybe, maybe not. So, traditionally we feed our dogs in the kitchen because dogs are kind of gross and slimy and make messes. But if I've got a very under-socialized dog that can't even make it to the kitchen, I'm going to have to make a couple accommodations and say, all right, fine. So my under-socialized dog can eat in the closet, and my, other dog who's his buddy can eat on this little mat that I bring up that's at least near the closet. You might also find that some dogs eat better at certain times of day. Maybe their appetite's better first thing in the morning. Do they eat better overnight? Again, this is going to come down to a lot of observations and, kind of tracking what works best based on what you've changed. Other things are going to be, do they do okay eating out of a bowl? Which sounds really silly, but there are plenty of dogs that have no idea what a bowl is. And the concept of eating food out of a bowl is really scary. So maybe they do better if I just pour a cup onto the floor near their little safe spot, and that's how they eat it. But in a perfect world, we want to be able to use some of this food to provide some degree of enrichment, because it's not good for them to just sit in the closet day in and day out. But they're certainly not ready for me to drag them out and take them for long walks. So if they have to eat something, what are some ways that I can change up the way they eat it so that they have to think and, interact in a little bit more. So this is where we use find it games or snuffle mats, puzzle toys. Again, puzzle toys might be kind of scary, especially if it's on a hard floor because they make these loud banging noises when they're being bobbled around. Some under-socialized dogs won't care about that, but some absolutely will. So playing around with some of these different tactics with your particular dog will be really important. All right, so elimination, going to the bathroom, is another biological need, but very difficult for some of these guys. So ultimately, many of them will end up doing better if we can put together an indoor elimination station. So house training comes down to two primary factors: what we call substrate preference and location preference. So the substrate preference is the surface on which they want to eliminate. So most of our dogs that we've potty trained effectively, their substrate preference is going to be grass, dirt, gravel, that kind of thing. And depending on where your under-socialized dog came from, maybe they don't know what grass is. Maybe they really do need a little gravel spot. Or, I've had one dog who needed to have a couple bricks as their elimination station. You got to work with what you got. But anyway, so recognizing what their substrate preference is, and then we put that substrate in a specific location that will feel safe for them. So again, ideally, this might be near their little hidey hole. We figure out ways to prevent their indoor potty area from damaging any of the underlying flooring by, do we put a tarp under the sod, or do we put it in a big, what are they called? Underbed sweater boxes, that kind of stuff. So one of the big concerns that people will present to me when I talk about this is, well, are they ever going to learn to go to the bathroom outside? And the answer is yes, absolutely. But right now, phase one with a tier 5 under-socialized dog is I need to make sure that they can eliminate in a safe place that's appropriate. So a lot of these guys, they can't go outside and they're going to pee in the house. So at least by setting up these stations, I'm giving them a well-managed area that's not going to damage my carpet and subflooring. We will eventually get to the point where we're trying to teach them to go to the bathroom outside. But again, phase one is safety. Depending on how interactive you can be with your dog, you can certainly do basic training with it where we still go to our little potty area, even if it's inside, and we do our basic, okay, go potty, and we wait a couple minutes and they go to the bathroom and we go, yay, look, you went to the bathroom, and you give them treats for that. So the only difference between traditional house training and elimination station training is you're doing everything indoors versus outdoors, but we're still trying to teach them, yes, good things happen when you go to the bathroom in this particular area. All right, so under the feeding section, we briefly talked about enrichment. So with normal dogs, we're doing things like going for walks and we're playing and we're doing feed toys and we're doing training and you're getting cuddles and all this stuff. But when you have an under-socialized animal, it's going to be very difficult for them to, one, cope with, never mind actually enjoy these different types of enrichment. So while walks might not be possible at this point and giving cuddles and pets is not going to happen, there's lots of alternatives that we can work on. So maybe the dog enjoys getting in the car. Maybe that we can just go for a drive with the windows down. That's super enriching. You're in a safe space, but you can smell things, you can see, you can hear, like really cool things are happening, but I don't have to have my feet on the pavement for that walk, if you will. Other things you can do is create little scent bags. So I learned about this from one of my colleagues, another veterinary technician specialist, who had two dogs, one of which was an older who couldn't go for walks anymore. But when she took her younger dog for walks, she would have these little like sandwich baggies. And anytime her dog stopped to smell something for an extended period of time, she would take one of those baggies and grab some of the grass or the dirt or leaves or whatever from that area the dog was sniffing. And then she would take that little scent bag back to the dog at home. And that's something that we can do for our guys too. Do I have another dog? What do they think is interesting? Can I stick some dirt from that in this little baggie? And then I can take that fun smell home to my under-socialized dog and let them sniff it. Other things that you can do, I mean, basic training is always enriching. Maybe you have a play date with one dog, so you might have to be a little creative with some of these things. But ultimately, it's important to remember that these are not normal dogs. They are not going to enjoy things that your typical pro-social, happy-go-lucky, well-socialized dog will. So make sure you're monitoring that body language to ensure you're gauging their comfort level. And walks don't have to be the end all be all for these guys. Even best case scenario, some of these under socialized dogs, they've never really learned how to go for walks. And that's okay, because there's all sorts of other things that we can do around the house that will still help them live their best lives. Okay, so getting into learning and teaching. So ideally, we're still doing some training with these guys. Now, keep in mind that even in under-socialized dogs, they're learning whether I'm actively participating in the training process or not. And that's why we focus so much on leaving them alone when they're in their safe space, because they're learning when I'm here, I'm safe. My people will leave me alone. And you are teaching them that by respecting their space. But if we're talking a little bit more about direct learning and teaching, when we're working with special needs dogs, we use the term behavior modification, or BMOD, instead of quote unquote training, because training is more about the physicality of, can you do the thing that I told you to do, yes or no? Whereas with BMOD, we're using training to help train not only the body, but also the brain, because I want you to be confident and relaxed and happy when you're doing the things that I ask you to do. So you can often think of BMOD more as teaching confidence and coping skills than traditional sit, calm down type training skills. So there's two main ways that animals are going to actively learn. The first one is through classical conditioning, where we're learning by association. I'm not going to go into all of this, but it's basically learning that when this thing happens, good things result. Or when I'm in this situation, bad things happen. So I associate the nail trimmers with really scary things. So I associate nail trimmers with a nail trim, which I hate. Therefore, the nail trimmers I hate. So it's learning by association. And then our traditional training is through operant conditioning, which is learning through consequences. So this is where we talk about positive reinforcement, negative punishment, that kind of stuff. So the learner does a thing, and then the consequence determines whether they're going to want to do that thing again or not. So to get us into some practical techniques, step one, we've got luring, which is how most of us teach our basic skills. We use a treat as a way to prompt the behavior. Targeting is when we teach the animal to touch a part of their body to an object. So a hand target, for example, I hold out my two fingers, I say touch, the dog comes over and boops it with their nose. Capturing is me setting up the environment so that the desired behavior is more likely to occur, and then I reward them when they offer it. And I have a video on that in a minute, so we'll get back to that. Shaping is then taking a big complicated behavior, breaking it into smaller pieces, and rewarding each of those steps individually, which we'll see in just a second. We've got desensitization, which takes something that the animal is really scared of, and we expose them to it in small enough intensity that they don't react negatively to it. So for example, if let's say I have a dog who's terrified of plastic bags. So if I'm trying to desensitize an animal to a plastic bag, I'm going to be way over on the other side of the room, and I'm just going to crinkle the plastic bag a little bit. And then ideally the dog recognizes that the thing crinkled a little bit, but they don't panic. And I go, yay, look, you did a thing. And then counter conditioning is when we're changing that negative fear response to the plastic bag to one of more positive anticipation. It's fun stuff. And then we often use desensitization and counter conditioning together. So we're moving the plastic bag just a little bit, and then I'm giving you a high value treat in response to you not doing anything. So in these couple videos, we're going to take a look at luring. So the first one, we're using the treat to prompt the behavior. So we move the treat over the head to help them sit, and then in front of the nose to try and make them stand. Okay. So then with shaping, this is muzzle shaping. I show it, you get a treat for looking at it. You touch it, you get a treat for touching it. You come back over, maybe you put your face in it. Oh, no treat. Okay, there we go. Had to work harder for it. All right, so I'm rewarding closer and closer approximations of put your face in the muzzle. So this is how we teach all of our super complicated skills. And then this is capturing. So this was my parents' dog who hadn't had a lick of training in his life, and I'm trying to teach him how to lie down. So I set up this environment where it's just me. He's tied to the table, so he can't wander off and do anything else. And I basically just sit here and I wait for him to get bored and lie down. So here he goes, super bored, la, la, la. Ugh, fine, lie down. And you get a click for that. Good job. And you get a treat. So in the very beginning, when we're capturing, he has no idea what he's getting a treat for. It's like, oh, okay, that's cool. So what I do then is I put a couple treats in front of him to reset it, and then we get bored, we try it again. And so it's through this repetition that he's eventually like, okay, lying down gets me the treat. Got it. So in that one, he's actually looking like, look, I'm lying down. And then we add a word to it. Good job. Okay. So when we're dealing with under-socialized animals, it's important to remember that fear is going to block the learning process. Sometimes it helps to think of your doggy's brain as having sort of like two mini brains in there. You've got your thinking brain and your feeling brain. So if your feeling brain is completely in control right now, there is no thinking brain going on. So thinking is where learning happens. And so again, that's where making sure that they have a safe place is really important, because if they don't feel safe, they're always going to be scared and they're never going to be able to learn anything new. So realize that that is a big deal for them. So with these guys, oh no, I put these in the wrong way. Here we go. Sorry. Okay. So under the fear blocks learning, we want to avoid luring. The reason being, you have to be in their personal bubble to use luring as a training tool. Because again, if I'm using the food as a prompt to kind of move you in the right position to sit, I'm basically invading your personal space to get you to eat that treat and put your bottom down. So instead, we focus a lot more on hands-free training so that we're not applying so much social pressure to the learning process. So we focus a lot more on capturing and waiting for them to make brave decisions. And then I go, yes, good job. You stood up and walked out of the closet. I'm going to throw a treat at you from way across the room. So they chose to do that. I'm just happening to apply a slightly higher reward than you might have gotten by yourself. And then we also can use those shaping techniques where I use lots of mini capturing episodes to gradually build up to, hey, can you walk over to me? And that might be, you can see the progression from, bottom right here is first you're going to look at me and I'm going to say, yes, good job. You get a treat for that. And then, oh, excuse me, maybe you make direct eye contact. Oh, fantastic. There you go. You get a treat for that. And then you're going to gradually start moving towards me. So we use capturing and shaping behavior modification techniques because it's not a type of pressured learning. The animal is choosing whether they want to participate in the learning process or not. I just happen to be there to give a reinforcer to say, yes, that was a great decision. You should keep doing that. So it is also important to realize that these guys, again, because they were under-socialized, they didn't develop normally. So one of the things that I forgot to pin or mention during the socialization conversation is that when you're going through your socialization period, you're sort of pinging all these different areas in your brain, and you're telling your brain these things are important. So after the socialization window closes, any of those little files, if you will, in the brain that were not stimulated during socialization, they get moved to the trash folder. And so that's why dogs that are under socialized don't ever become normal, because the file folder that we needed to keep in order to, cope with car ride is in the trash. It's gone. You can't recover that file once it's been dumped. And so it's from there, we have to realize that these animals truly have medical conditions. Anxiety is a medical problem because the brain is not functioning normally. It does not create chemicals the way it is supposed to. And so if we're implementing all of these safety strategies and we're really trying to promote positive social interactions, we're going at our animal's pace, but it is a snail's pace, then at that point, it might be a good idea to say, hey, maybe we need to look at this from a medical standpoint and not just from a behavior modification, because sometimes the body is going to need essentially neurotransmitter supplements to be able to learn properly. So there's a lot of different things products wise that we can use out there. Some of them are over the counter, and those are great jumping off points. So we talked about the pheromone product Adaptil earlier. There's also things like probiotics, fatty acid supplements. L-theanine is a green tea supplement that you can get over the counter. So all of those things you can use on your own. Make sure you follow package instructions. As a way to sort of get the ball rolling. And if you try those things in conjunction with everything else we already talked about, then you can say, all right, maybe we really do need to go the actual medication route. And so there's a lot of different resources for where you can get help for all of these things. So, if we were going to start with just the behavior modification standpoint, there's your dog's friend has a fantastic, very comprehensive list of everybody in the DC metro area. But looking out for some of these logos and affiliations will help you determine whether a person you're looking at is qualified to work with your special needs dog. Because just like in the human realm, there are your standard elementary school teachers, which have a lot of education, but they're not special education teachers. That's why you have special education teachers. So if I have a trainer who does great with puppies and education and socialization, they're great at that job, but they are not great at dealing with a special needs dog who's abnormal and isn't going to be able to learn like a normal animal does. From there, like we said, if we feel that just learning and environmental management isn't helping, we can certainly talk to our primary care veterinarian. I really feel like, my dog's anxiety is impacting his quality of life. He's too anxious, and I want to discuss medication options at this point. And then if you want the gold standard, you can always reach out to our area's veterinary behaviorists. We've got 3 up here. We've got 1 in Fairfax, Ashburn, and Washington, D.C. And all 3 of them are very, sadly, very well acquainted with our under-socialized dogs. So they're going to be able to help you put together a full comprehensive plan that incorporates all the things that we talked about, including the medical intervention to get your dog where you want them to be. So ultimately, it's important to realize that these dogs are never going to be 100% normal. They're always going to have certain areas of life that they really struggle with. And part of pet ownership is recognizing where they are in life. How can we support them most effectively? And how do we develop a happy life for that individual? Because every dog is different. Every dog, even our neurotypical dogs, some are going to enjoy certain things that others will not. And if they don't need to do those things, then we try and give them joy where they find it, not necessarily where we want them to find it. So at this point, we'll open up our questions. I see we have lots of them.
We do have a lot of questions. So going back up to the top, Wendy asked, is the experience bank context dependent? So does the sum of the good and bad experiences depend on the circumstances, for example, out in the world versus at home?
That's a fantastic question. So it's a little bit of both. Because dogs are very contextual with their learning. So they might say, I've never been to, I don't know, the park before. So if I have lots of really positive experiences at the park, that doesn't automatically mean I can translate that to somebody's backyard. However, part of that context is also the presence of their person. So if I have a lot of very positive experiences with my person, and I know my person is reliable and trustworthy, then I might be a little bit more comfortable trying new things in a different context because that person is with me.
All right, so our next question is Wendy again. Can't the kind of body language you describe as being characteristic of under-socialized dogs also be seen in stress dogs, as in shelter environment? So many seem to warm up after adjusting to a safe environment.
Absolutely. Again, kind of contextual. I mean, even those types of dogs, theoretically, they could be under socialized. We don't always know their history, right? So maybe they're like a tier 1 or 2 where, like we talked about, they do take a little bit of warm up time. But you're right, it could just be overstimulation. There's a lot of bombardment and sounds and noises, so much going on in a shelter environment. So, really what we're looking at as far as those characteristics are consistency. So are they always showing those behaviors? How quickly do they warm up with things? So they're certainly not only in under socialized dogs, they're just very common.
Thank you. So Stacy, she asked regarding abused dogs being more likely to be pro-social than avoidant. Is there any research about this, or is it being stated as personal anecdotes? She tends to agree, but would like to have more official collective information or research to cite if possible.
I really wish there was more research. I think part of the inhibiting factor there is, again, we don't always know the background in these guys. So no, that is an anecdotal finding. There's no official research, or at least no published research.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that we don't have the history on so many of our dogs.
Actually, one more thought. I will say that a lot of the times when we're talking about veterinary medicine and behavior, we're sort of extrapolating from what we know about human psychology. And we do find that with humans as well. Is that trauma victims, they tend to be very fawning and appeasing versus your under socialized humans like the genies of the world. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her, but they tend to be very, very antisocial. They don't want to interact. They just don't know how.
Excellent. So Maria, I have a 1-year-old fearful dachshund. I'd say he's at a stage 3 of severity. He has doggy friends, but is afraid of strange dogs out in the world. I am putting in lots of effort to address it. Would getting a second dachshund be a bad idea? I know he would love a little brother or sister, but I am just a bit worried if it would affect the second dog and just make the situation worse instead of better.
Great question. So this is kind of where a foster to adopt type situation could be really helpful, because it gives you the opportunity to find a good personality fit. Because you're right, there are going to be some dogs who come into that household as the second dog and they kind of suck some of the stress out of the other dog. Whereas if you have a very stoic, well-balanced, maybe adult dachshund coming in, he's like, no, dude, like, why are you worrying about that? That's really not a big deal. So I'm sure there's a lot of dachshund specific rescues that you could coordinate with, and just let them know that you have this situation and say, hey, do you have any personality types that you think would work well with my first one? And then, worst case scenario, we've already had a good open conversation about it. If it ends up not working out, at least you can say, you know what, I fostered this really awesome dog and I helped get him on the way to his forever home.
Excellent answer. And I really like the idea of the fact that you didn't just relinquish the dog, because what you did was help him gain more skills for his forever home.
Exactly.
That's a really good way to look at it. So Dorothy asks, I have an Italian Greyhound who can sometimes go for walks and sometimes just seems very fearful of being outside. I can almost always carry him on a walk and then put him down to walk back home. He's okay when walking when on the return trip, but stops and tries to turn around when we start out on walks. Other times he can walk fine without any problems, and I have not been able to determine why sometimes walks are fine and other times walks are just too much for him. Have you seen this kind of issue before, and do you have any advice?
Sure. I have seen this before. To kind of speak to the different interests in walks, I guess we could put it. You could say humans are the same way. There's certainly days that I wake up in the morning, I'm like, the last thing I want to do is go anywhere or do anything or talk to anyone. which we were talking about before we started. Yeah. But, we can communicate that to other people and say, I don't feel good. I got an upset stomach. I had a bad dream last night. I just don't feel good. And there's no way dogs can communicate those complex concepts to us. So the only way they can say I'm having a bad day is through that, like, I don't really want to go out right now. So in that scenario, there's certainly nothing wrong with saying, hey, if you're not interested in going for a walk today, what do you want to do? Do you want to maybe just play around the house? Do you want to play tug? Do you want to have a couple feeder toys? You don't have to force them to go for walks if they don't want to. There are certainly going to be scenarios where I have to put you in a situation that you don't like. Veterinary care is a perfect example. But it's not like I have to take you to the vet 3 times a week. We go once or twice a year. We struggle through it. We do the best we can. Nobody likes going to the doctor, and then we move on with life. So if there are other things that you can be doing that he does find interesting, then we can certainly do that. Now, as far as the, picking him up and carrying him out on the walk, you know, again, kind of going back to what Carrie and I were talking about, we're both very introverted. And so the process of getting ready to go out is very daunting. But sometimes once you're already out there, you're like, okay, well, I'm out. I guess I might as well go smell this tree or, see who peed on this or whatever. So it wouldn't be unusual. They're like, oh, my friend dragged me out. I'm going to make the best of this as I can. So it's certainly not unusual, again, because you're going to have good days and bad days. Once you're already out and about, yeah, you can kind of struggle through it, but it doesn't always mean you're enjoying it. You're just kind of doing the best you can with what you got.
Yeah, another thing you might try is pattern games.
Oh, yeah.
Do have several videos on pattern games, and I can't remember if there is a class coming up right away, a virtual class on pattern games, but that's another great resource to check out. So Wendy, this question is referring back to the video where you were capturing the laying down behavior with the dog. I noticed that you aren't giving the rewards directly to the dog. Is there a reason for that?
Sure. Let's see. And actually, let me pull that up again so that we can all watch it in case we don't remember what that looks like. So I kind of am, because I've got a clicker in my hand while I'm reading and I'm watching. So I click, and then I've got a little bowl. Just kidding. The bowl is later. So there's the treat. So I am giving it directly to him. There are a little bit later on where sometimes I think I'll toss the treats away. Yeah, there you go. So he got one right in his face, and then I tossed a couple treats. So the reason I'm doing that is because I'm trying to reset the exercise, because dogs don't have this concept of I'm already lying down. So if I'm getting a treat, I need to lie down. I need to reward the action of lying down. So you have to therefore reset the exercise to make him stand again so that he can lie down again, if that makes sense.
Let's see, where are we? Stacy. I have a 16-month-old Springer Spaniel who can't go on walks without barking and lunging at anyone in sight. He also has started barking at new people who come in the house. He warms up fast in the house. This seems like reactivity, and I'm not sure how to reduce it.
Sure. So yeah, I would consider that reactivity, and it's a little beyond the scope of today's conversation, but it still ultimately comes down to, how do I make my dog feel safe? How do I expose them to these scary triggers in a small enough way that he's not reacting to it? So I would certainly reach out to a behavior consultant who can work directly with you and your dog, because at 16 months old, we are coming into some of those fear periods. So it's a very common age for us to develop reactivity. So I'd love for you to get on it as quickly as you can, so that way we're not solidifying these behaviors into adulthood. So for right now, minimize walks as much as you can, and then get help for all the bigger topics.
So Stacy, I think it's the same Stacy. I'm a dog walker and sometimes have dogs that are very anxious outside, sometimes inside as well. Do you have any advice for helping guardians understand that their dogs do not need to be outside longer than going potty? There's a good one about the walks. I find that many people think their dog will eventually get over it without actively doing any counter conditioning or desensitization.
Sure. That is a very, it depends on the person, quite honestly. Just like when we're trying to teach our dogs, the personality type really comes into play. And so usually what I try and do is focus on what I'm seeing is the dog is doing X, Y, and Z. And so I feel so it's not so much like your dog is terrified, it's all your fault, I'm not walking it. Because that's very confrontational. It's not going to get you where you want to go. But by outlining, like, look, he's showing a lot of really fearful behaviors. I'm really uncomfortable pushing him and putting him in a situation that makes him uncomfortable. So I would prefer that I take him out for potty breaks and then we focus on some play while you're, not at home. And depending on the response to that, then maybe you could gently push in, I've seen dogs like this before. I worry he won't outgrow it. I've got a couple really awesome people that could come and work with you that can help him be confident and be able to go on walks more. But I think a lot of the times we have this social stigma of like, you have to walk your dog 3.5 times per day. And it's really hard to break out of that box for a lot of people.
Exactly. Let's see. Jan, we've had our new dog for 3 weeks tomorrow. Congratulations. He was a stray and we rescued him. He was great the first week, but now if anyone comes to our house, he goes in attack mode. He acts like that on a walk. If he sees anyone or another dog or hears someone talking outside, it's very frustrating.
Oh, that's so sad. Yeah, so this is another scenario. It is a little outside the scope of our conversation, so I would definitely reach out to a behavior consultant. But new dogs that come into the household will often go through what we call a honeymoon period, where they kind of keep to themselves and they're sort of on their best behavior for a period of time as they're kind of learning how the family operates and who has this sense of humor or whatever you want to call it. But then after they do become more comfortable, they start feeling emboldened and able to act out on those underlying fears. So remember, aggression is always stemmed from a place of discomfort, fear, trying to control a scary situation. So same thing that I mentioned to the other reactive dog is minimize interactions as much as you can for right now and get somebody's help.
Excellent. Let's see, we've had a rat terrier mix for 6 months now that we adopted at 9 months old. He is anxious, fearful around my husband, especially when I am with him. Maybe he's possessive of me. He's great with our young daughters, most dogs and some men. We're seeing a behavioral vet that has prescribed him a low dose of Reconcile. He seems slightly better, but not much. Any behavioral training you would recommend? We've tried treats from my husband already.
Sure. So that might be one of those scenarios where maybe he just didn't have as much socialization to males. And, it's probably nothing particular about your husband. It's just, maybe he glommed onto you a bit more quickly. And then, by comparison, daddy's not quite as fun. So this is where that two-way conversation is going to come into play. So make sure your husband knows how to disengage and avoid direct contact. And I would focus a lot on make sure your husband isn't handing him the treats. I would be tossing treats because a lot of dogs can be really food motivated and sort of overcome their distrust of someone to get the reward. And then they're like, oh boy, I'm way too close to this person. This is really overwhelming. So whenever your husband is trying to interact with the dog, make sure he's tossing treats away from him. And that way there's no pressure to come closer than you're comfortable with. Now, if he's on low dose Reconcile, it's going to take a few weeks for him to acclimate to that dosage. And then your doctor will probably have you increase in a little bit. So, again, we can certainly set you up with a behavior consultant who can help you one-on-one with that type of training. It's hard to talk about in a 30-second answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I would agree too, as a trainer who works with a lot of fearful under-socialized dogs, it's never too early to ask questions, to contact a trainer or a vet and ask questions. Most trainers will give you a few tips on, over the phone if it's something simple, or can get you some help early, because the earlier you get help, the easier it is to overcome all that stuff.
Exactly. They're kind of like bad habits. The longer you let the bad habits simmer, the harder it is to change.
Any behavioral trainer organization recommendations?
Yeah. So like I said, Your Dog's Friend has a really awesome, very comprehensive list for different regions of the DC metro area. Shameless plug, I do lots of virtual stuff. So you're welcome to schedule some consultations with me, and I can get a lot of things rolling before you need someone to come directly into your house, especially for under-socialized dogs, because they're so fearful of the world anyway. Having someone new come into your house can be really overwhelming. So, as much as we would love to have our trainers and consultants come directly to our house, sometimes it works out better to do a few weeks virtually. And that way we can coach you on how to work through some of these things. We build a little bit of traction, and then we can get somebody to come directly to your house.
Now, what a fantastic webinar, Jessey. So again, thank you so much for presenting. It was a great webinar. It's very helpful, generated lots of good questions from people. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. We're glad you chose to spend your afternoon with us. Again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.